Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Azure podcast. This is your host, Evan Baslick, and today is December 15th. Like we talked about last week, Christmas is coming. If you haven't done your shopping, get out there and do it soon. I'm joined by Sajit and Cynthia, and today we're going to be talking with Tanu, Balla, and Isabelle Morris about Azure Bastion, and this is episode 406. Sajit, Cynthia, what do we got for news today?
Yeah, one around attribute-based access control, so ABAC. So I think for a lot of our listeners, you're probably very familiar with RBAC, which is role-based access control. And now we are introducing ABAC that is in public preview for Azure Storage. What attribute-based access control means is that in addition to the roles, you can add some conditions to what people can access, what resources, and when. So some examples could be you can only have access if the blob has a specific tag, or you can only have access to blob that are named for a certain format. And this also,
So this is basically looking at the blob to decide what you have access to, not looking at your role to decide what you have access to.
so in addition to your role, like there's
Right.
also additional conditions. So you can leverage your existing like built-in role assignments, because that's
Mhm.
also the other thing, that there's limitations on how many custom roles that you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
assign. But this condition adds yet another layer of security as well as granularity into what exactly people can and cannot do.
Nice. Okay. Sujit?
Yeah, I've got a couple over here. One is with Key Vault. Key Vault obviously has a facility where customers can put their certificates and their keys. And in the past, rotation of that was a problem, right? The customer would have to go through a process where they would have to rotate the keys and inform everybody that the keys are rotated and whatnot. And of course, if you forget or you're not on a regular cadence, that could be a problem. So now there's automatic rotation of keys in Key Vault. It's a preview feature, and you set up a schedule, and using Event Grid, you can also set up an automatic notification of when those keys are expired, so that if you have an application that's relying on those keys, they know that they should whatever purge the cache, or make sure they get the new keys from Key Vault, because the old keys are now expired. And so this kind of automated method of rotating the keys and also informing applications that the keys have been expired is a new feature in Key Vault, which is currently in preview. I think it's definitely going to be an interesting one for our customers. The other one I have is, and Kendall would have covered this if she were here today, but around AKS. And so
She
GitOps is a
missed her
big feature.
chance.
She missed a chance, and I'm going to grab it. So AKS, I mean, GitOps, sorry, has been something that a lot of companies have adopted, essentially infrastructure as code. Where the infrastructure is stored in some sort of a Git repository, and then the system will just pull that infrastructure and then configure itself accordingly. In the past, we've had that for Azure Kubernetes Arc-enabled clusters. That's kind of how it worked for Arc-enabled Kubernetes clusters. But now AKS also supports this using the popular Flux toolset, which is an open source system that essentially allows you to do that. Bootstrap Kubernetes with a known configuration that is pulled from a Git repository. And of course, as you push updates to the Git repository, it can, the system can reconfigure itself accordingly. So this is, again, a nice feature, I think. I think in the past, you've had to do that manually, installing various packages and, setting up the system. But now, right out of the box, you get, GitOps for AKS clusters. So something for our customers to look into.
Nice. Cool. Excellent. Well, with that, Tanu, Isabelle, can y'all introduce yourselves and tell us what you do here at Microsoft?
Sure. So, hi, I'm Tanu. I am a PM in Azure Networking, specifically working on hybrid networking services like Azure Bastion and then also ExpressRoute.
Hi, I'm Isabelle, and I'm also on Azure Networking, but specifically focusing on Azure Bastion.
Cool. Yeah, great. Well, thank you both. Thank you both for coming on. We were joking earlier. I, sort of an Azure networking wonk. I, spent a lot of time with the team and love the technology. And I saw, Bastion's been around for a little while, but I think there's still customers that aren't familiar with it. Can we start with, like, tell us what, from your perspective, what is Bastion, and why, as a customer, why would I ever want to use it?
Sure, I can start. I think it's important to talk about first what a Bastion host is in general, for those who don't know. So a Bastion host, which is almost interchangeably used as a jump box server, would be a single hardened access point that lets you access other servers in your network. And then what differentiates Azure Bastion is Azure Bastion is a fully managed platform as a service that provides more secure remote desktop protocol, RDP, and secure shell protocol SSH access to your virtual machines without any exposure through public IP addresses. And the main differentiation here is the fully managed part. So as a customer, you might want to use Azure Bastion to have more secure and seamless access to your virtual machines without exposing your public IP address to the internet, as well as having us manage that platform for you, and we fully maintain it, update it, and audit it.
So basically this is sort of the old jump box construct, but it's a modern managed service variant of that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
So when you said the host, does Bastion host come with that server as well, or is that a service attached to one of my jump boxes? Oh,
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a good question. Yeah.
Sorry, muting issues. So Bastion comes with the underlying compute resources that you need to actually have a jump box. So if you already have a jump box set up, then it becomes more of a transition over to using Bastion. And otherwise, deploying a Bastion will give you that jump box access.
I know system administrators, prefer certain operating systems when they use jump boxes. Is there a choice of whether they get like a Linux or a Windows-based, whatever, a Bastion host, or is it something that's predefined?
So in terms of the Bastion host itself, that's predefined. But I think what matters more to the customer is what they get access to, because the Bastion is just this pass-through to get to your target VMs in Azure. And for that, you can access both Linux VMs and Windows VMs.
Okay, so with the when you connect to the Bastion host, the prompt or whatever the host, the prompt that you get is that a Linux prompt that you get right away? I guess that's what I'm asking. Or how does that work? Don't you have to first connect to the Bastion host and then connect to your target machine?
Yeah, so when you deploy your Bastion and it sits in your virtual network, it's just running all the time, available for you to use. Then when you're logging into your target VM, we offer a portal-based experience as the primary experience. So you just go to your VM in the portal, and you go to the Connect blade, and then you have the option to log in via Bastion. At that point, you just put in your credentials as if you were putting them into the target VM. So it's just this nice UI for username or password, or you could also provide an SSH key pair. And then that submits to the Bastion, which sends it to the target VM for authentication. And if all goes well, then your target VM pops up in a new window, either with the expected Linux UI or Windows UI based on what kind of VM it is.
So, let's step back a little bit, because I think one of the things that I hear customers talk about in this is, if I've got a either a Bastion resource, or the traditional model like of a jump box VM deployed in my VNet, and I can RDP to it, SSH to it, whatever. At the end of the day, I'm still exposing that into my virtual network. How is that more secure? How is, maybe the extension is, how does Bastion bring an additional level of security on top of that, versus just saying, hey, I have this public IP in my VM, and I'm going to lock it down to just Sajid's public IP, or to his source IP endpoint. I just really write my NSG relay target. Like, how what's the security benefit of having this managed service doing it, versus me just really controlling the access to my virtual machine really tightly?
Sure. So the primary part is going to be the lack of needing a public IP attached to your target VM. So if we're thinking about a customer who has like several different VMs deployed in their Azure virtual networks that they need to access that are running workloads, and they need to access them for some reason, and they're not usually accessing these resources. The typical way to do it is to have a public IP attached to the VM, unless you're using some form of hybrid connectivity, such as VPN gateway or ExpressRoute, and then using that public IP, you can connect to the VM. With Bastion, as Isabelle explained before, you no longer need to have all these public IPs attached to each of your VMs. And therefore, you're reducing the number of public access points to your virtual network down to one. And that one is the public IP that sits on your Bastion. Also, because your Bastion is at the perimeter of your virtual network, that gives you just like one endpoint to harden as opposed to just so many across your VNets.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So it's really about collapsing it down to one endpoint I need to worry about instead of having a whole set of them at that point. You mentioned internal, connectivity across, VPN or ExpressRoute. Is there a scenario where I would use Bastion even with private connectivity, or is it really targeted at, that public internet connectivity scenario?
So as of right now, we actually don't support the use of Bastion with ExpressRoute, although that's something that we're working towards. And once the capability is available, I think we will see how customers respond to that and whether they want the additional security benefits or also just the lightweight access benefits of Bastion on top of using ExpressRoute.
Okay.
How does the security model work with Azure Bastion? Like, typically a customer has some sort of an IT department or system administrators that would be allowed access to them, right? So I guess half of the question is, what kind of credentials or what kind of roles do they have to set up for them to get access? And B, is there some concept like source IP whitelisting that Evan mentioned also involved with the setup of Azure Bastion?
So I think there's a pretty simple setup if you use the portal, and it definitely depends on the customer what the roles would be. So if you want to spread it across your organization, there might just be one administrator keeping track of all the bastions and managing them from the portal. And they could set up role-based access control within the bastion or set up rules so that users don't have the same type of capabilities as an admin would. But if you have a smaller amount of users or maybe just one user, then you could just have all the access control be there.
And the follow-up question is there also the concept of the just-in-time access like we've had for other kinds of VM access?
We do not currently have just-in-time access compatible with Bastion.
So, question about multiple user. Can multiple user use the same Bastion instance at the same time? And how does scaling work if, for instance, I'm a company that has hundreds and thousands of VMs, and does everyone go through that same host?
Yeah, so I think for a smaller amount of users, you might want to have just one Bastion or a few Bastions connected to a few different VMs. But if you are a larger organization having, hundreds of VMs and lots of users, you would upgrade to our standard SKU, where that's where we really get into host scaling and having many more users on one Bastion.
And is that scaling automatic, or is that something the user needs to manage and set, well, not even set, but go in manually and increase them if I knew beforehand that hundreds of people will be accessing at the same time?
So it's going to be manual scaling. And so you can scale from our scale units start at 2, which is what your basic SKU comes with as well. And if you're on standard SKU, you can manually scale as needed up to 50 scale units. And so that'll get you to a total of around like 500 concurrent RDP sessions at that full capacity, depending on the workloads you're running.
Thank you.
So I think you might have answered my question there, but when I hear you describe this from a technical perspective, it sounds like Bastion is actually proxying the connection between me on premises, coming across the internet to that, and then it's proxying that connection to the virtual machine, or is it sort of redirecting me and then now I'm talking directly to the virtual machine? So basically, am I going through Bastion at all times, or is it just for the initial connection?
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, you're going to go through the Bastion at all times. You connect through the Bastion, and then the Bastion will provide you RDP or SSH connectivity to your virtual machine from there.
Okay. And then obviously I don't want to necessarily get into like, hey, it costs X number of dollars per hour or whatever. But from a costing perspective with Bastion, do I pay just like I pay a virtual machine, and then there's Bastion on top of that? Like I can deploy AKS right on top of nodes, and I just pay for the nodes just like I do virtual machines? Or is Bastion sort of, but do I pay for it more like I do with like VPN gateway or ExpressRoute gateway, where I don't even really necessarily know what's underneath it. I'm just paying, per hour for that the PaaS resource.
Yeah, so you are paying for the PaaS resource. So you're paying for your Bastion host, which is deployed in your virtual network in its own subnet. And then if you go to standard SKU and scale up your gateway to have additional scale units, then in addition to paying a base cost per hour, you'll also pay for the cost of each scale unit in addition to that.
Okay, but I think my question is, like, if I look at VPN gateway, for example, there can be anywhere from 2 to, I don't even know what the max is these days. A lot of VMs underneath it, and but I'm not paying for it the same way I am if I go deploy an IaaS VM, right? There's sort of a roll-up cost, and I'm not responsible for deploying the virtual machines in a VPN gateway, I guess is where I'm going. Bastion, it sounds like it's closer to like VPN gateway, where I just say, hey, I want 10 VMs, and I pay whatever the charge is for Bastion, versus Bastion plus, some base virtual machine charge. Does that make sense?
Sure, I think so. So in general, you're going to be paying for your target VMs because those are separate resources, no matter how you connect to them.
Yep.
And then you also pay for just the Bastion.
Okay.
And it gets complicated at the standard SKU level because you're also considering on your own, like how many scale units you want. So there's going to be an additional charge based on the number of scale units. But if we're just looking at a basic Bastion, you're just paying a cost per hour.
Okay, great.
Yeah, with something like Bastion, and I'm guessing like auditing of access is a big ask from customers. How does that work? Like if they want to find out, hey, during this time something happened to this box, who accessed it? From the what's the logging story here? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so currently within the portal, you can get an overview of what sessions are going on within a Bastion, including like the subscription ID, the host name, the session ID. And then we also have monitoring metrics where you can see for Bastion, like what total memory is used CPU, used memory, session count, etc.
And you can go back and look at historical logs as well, like to see, okay, last week at this time frame, was Evan connected to this VM?
Wait a minute. What do you think I'm sneaking in? I think Cynthia is the one sneaking into your stuff.
Evan's there,
Hey,
like
use my
mining
name,
some
I'm using your name.
bitcoins.
That's how it works.
So I'd say that for now, or actually up until very recently, we really only focused on local credentials on the VM. And so those aren't tied to a user via, let's say, Azure AD. So that specificity hasn't been possible yet. And then now we recently announced in preview support for Azure AD-based login. So then you do get the benefits of using Azure AD now in whatever way you use Azure AD. And then going forward, now that we have that support, we can work towards figuring out if Evan has been doing something suspicious on the VMs.
Okay, y'all are
Everyone
uninvited.
knows.
Sorry, you're never coming back. This is uninvited completely. Feeling very picked on here.
I'm curious in terms of like what happens to the peered virtual networks. Like, do you need a bastion in each of your virtual network, or if it's peered, like your bastion can go as wide as whatever networks VNets that have been peered?
So that's a great question. Peering is actually a feature that has somewhat recently gone GA for us, which means that you can use one bastion in a virtual network and access any of the VMs in its host virtual network or peered virtual networks.
And if there are, I don't know if that ever happens, but if there are like zombie or ghost connections, through through Azure Bastion, can somebody go in and an admin go and say, okay, I need to clean up these connections or drop them? Is that kind of override feature available?
Yeah, so you can look at the ongoing sessions, as Isabelle mentioned before, and so you can go to that page in the portal and delete a session, and it'll end it and terminate it for the user.
Is zombie connection a thing?
It is. It is a thing.
Oh, I was like, wow. I thought he was going along with this whole, I don't know, holiday
It's
thing.
it's a networking thing. Only the networking
I knew
people
about ghost ones,
understand
but I
that.
didn't know zombie was one too. Wow. Okay.
Same. I think same concept at the end of the day. It's a big problem in the RDP world of these zombie sessions using up resources. So going back to since Sajit is accusing me of doing malicious things, through his Bastion host to his virtual machines, I assume you mentioned that AD sort of on the roadmap. It is the thinking that at that point I can apply full RBAC to it, plus I can apply all kinds of rules about, hey, Evan can access these virtual machines from work but not from home. I mean, do I have all that flexibility on the Bastion side, or is that something I need to configure at the virtual network or the virtual machine side? Like, where do I control those kind of rules or logic?
Sure. So I guess to go more into how that Azure AD support works, when you're deploying your VM, you can now choose to enable Azure AD-based login on the VM. That in itself is a pretty new feature. And so when you choose to do that, you have to set up certain roles on the VM to make sure that a user in the Azure AD has access. So that's on the VM level. And then Bastion just makes use of those roles that are already set up on the VM to determine if the user should get access, because it's just passing those authentication tokens along to the VM.
So you're talking like the old RDP in the Windows world, and Linux has sort of equivalents, but the admin role, the RDP users role, those kind of things at the guest OS level.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about from a network profile perspective, the home versus work thing? How does that come into play, or does it?
Right now, it doesn't, and that's not something that we've thought about extensively yet. But I guess now we'll consider it a little more.
we got a feature out of the AAD team last week when we had Nadeem on the show, and now we got a feature out of the Bastion team. We're on a roll here. So if I wanted to do that, then, because I think people do this, I would basically do this at the NSG level. Do I do it at the VNet where Bastion is, or do I do it at the VNet where my virtual machine is? It sounds like I'd probably do it at the Bastion level, right?
Yeah, you're going to want to do it at the Bastion level in order to lock down access to the Bastion.
Gotcha.
And so in addition to that, if there's any reason to log into the VMs not using Bastion, then you're also going to want NSGs outside of what's on the Bastion.
Okay. Yeah, we don't want people to. They're always going through Bastion. That's what we're shooting for here.
I'm given that we are probably all at our homes right now. Have you all seen like a rise in the usage of Bastion now that more and more people are working remotely and connecting? And were there any interesting patterns or trends that you've observed over the past 2 years? 2 years now, almost.
So Isabel and I are actually both, we started our first jobs here at Microsoft during the pandemic. So we haven't seen the trend data, or at least I haven't. Isabel, let me know if you have, from pre-pandemic up until now. But that is something that would be fun to look into.
Yeah, I think over the past year, we've definitely seen a lot of growth. I don't know if we can specifically contribute that to the pandemic or what it exactly it would be from, but we definitely have seen a lot of growth in the past year.
I know, Cynthia, that's a really good question, because I know when COVID first hit, one of the things I did, I partnered with some folks in CSS, and we actually saw an increase in VPN gateway cases at the very beginning of COVID, because everybody went home and now their VPN gateways are undersized or they're misconfigured. They had, they were standing one up sort of, with a day's notice. And so we did see that. So it wouldn't surprise me in the least that, if that people discovered Bastion that maybe weren't necessarily looking at it before, because they were coming from, across the express route connection or basically through internal connectivity. So y'all had good timing from that perspective. You saw the cool usage of the service.
Yeah, and I was wondering, what if customers do this onboarding process of moving from maybe a traditional Bastion host to Azure Bastion, is it considered a best practice to limit access to that host only from the Azure Bastion, I guess, source IP? I don't know how that works internally, but should they be restricting access, like all access must come through Azure Bastion, or something like that? If that makes sense.
So we're talking about, I guess, just NSGs at the Bastion level, if all your incoming traffic should go
at the host
Bastion.
level. I guess at the host level, I would say, okay, only allow remote access from the NSG, from the Azure Bastion IP address, right, internally. So that way you're saying, I only want to have everybody connect through the Bastion. I don't want anyone connecting directly to the VMs, something like that.
Oh, I see what you're asking.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can't confirm an answer off the top of my head there when it comes to VM level access, but that is something that we probably have documented.
Yeah, I suspect, Sajid, because we're proxying, the connection is going to show up as coming from the Bastion VM. So if you're locking down VNet to VNet traffic or subnet traffic to, if you're mapping to private IPs, I would, I'm going to say I'm about 95% certain it's going to show up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a way of, because you get all this auditing and everything, right? You want all traffic to flow that way, right? Anybody, you don't want anybody jumping the gun and going straight to the VMs, because then you may not have that traceability.
Yep. That makes sense. Cool. Well, no, this was great. I think of all the times that I'd recommended, to customers to set up jump boxes, and now having a service that, just sort of one they don't have to manage, they don't have to keep up to date, right? Nothing. I think this is great. Any last thoughts, Isabelle or Tanu, that we want to leave the audience with, or anything we didn't hit on that you feel like we should stress?
Don't use public IPs on your target VMs if you don't have to. Use a Bastion.
Actually, so I hadn't thought about this, but when we do stuff internally here at Microsoft, we have policies that come through and say, hey, do you have public IPs on your resources? And it'll literally yank them, and pull them off. I assume that Bastion, we sort of have the integration is there with policy management, that it looks at Bastion as not just another VM, and so you can sort of enforce what you're talking about, which is don't use those public IPs. And so one policy checkbox, and we can drive everybody to Bastion. There we go. Cool, great. Well, no, this is awesome. Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you.
We'll post some links on the show notes, and when you guys come out with, I heard Express Route's coming in the future. When that comes out, we'll have you back on. Just kidding. Thanks, folks.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Happy holidays.
Oh yeah, this might actually be our last show before the holidays, right? Do we have one more?
I think this is our last show.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, everybody definitely have some happy holidays.